Picture walls so thick, 2 full chariots could race side by side across their tops. This was no ordinary city. This was Babylon, the most fortified city in the ancient world. Vast food reserves, unlimited water, an army within its walls. The defending soldiers laughed from those towers. Historians agreed, conquering Babylon wasn't just difficult, it was considered physically impossible. In 539 BC, Cyrus the Great, ruler of the Persian Empire, marched his army toward a city that had never once fallen. Every general advised him the same: turn around. A direct assault? Suicide. A slow siege? Useless. The Euphrates fed the city endlessly. But Cyrus hadn't forged one of the most powerful empires of his age by following conventional logic. He saw something no one else could see. His generals stared at the walls. Cyrus stared at the river. The Euphrates cut straight through the heart of Babylon, a lifeline that made the city seem unconquerable, or so everyone believed. What followed wasn't a conventional battle. It was one of the boldest engineering gambits in the history of ancient warfare. This is the story of how one man didn't break Babylon's walls, he simply walked through them by making the river disappear. To understand what Cyrus pulled off, you need to understand exactly what he was facing. Babylon wasn't just a city, it was a masterpiece of paranoid engineering. The outer walls stretched for miles, baked mud brick sealed with bitumen tar. Ancient sources suggest they were wide enough for a 4-horse chariot to turn at the top. Ancient sources describe Babylon as having countless bronze gates and deep water-filled moats protecting every approach. Attacking meant walking into a kill box with no exit. Cyrus camped outside and understood immediately what every commander before him had learned. His immortals, his elite shock troops, were worthless here. You can't stab a 50-foot wall. Weeks turned into months. The longer the siege dragged on, the more pressure mounted on the Persian camp. Something had to give, and it wasn't going to be the walls. Inside the city, King Belshazzar was throwing lavish banquets. He tossed food from the ramparts. He wanted Cyrus to watch and to break. He wanted the Persians to exhaust their supplies, lose their nerve, and crawl home in shame. He believed those walls made him untouchable. Cyrus refused the bait. He didn't look at the walls. He rode upstream, well beyond Babylonian scouts, and studied the river. The Euphrates was Babylon's beating heart. It entered the city through massive iron grates beneath the walls, a lifeline, and the only real flaw in the armor. Cyrus asked his chief engineer one question: can we divert this river? Can we actually move the Euphrates? The engineer stared at him in silence. The scale was almost incomprehensible. Rerouting a river this size would require moving massive quantities of earth, in secret, undetected, with enemy scouts watching every horizon. Cyrus gave the order anyway. He split his army into 2 forces. A fraction stayed at the main gates. Their only job, hold Babylonian attention. Those men lit thousands of campfires, marched in formations, beat drums at the walls. A full theatrical deception, keeping every Babylonian eye pinned to the front. Meanwhile, the bulk of the Persian army vanished north into the desert. Elite soldiers traded their weapons for iron shovels and picks. Tens of thousands of men began carving a massive artificial diversion channel into the earth. Night work only, no torches, complete darkness. It was grinding, brutal labor. Men worked until they collapsed. Xenophon's account portrays Cyrus sharing the hardship alongside his troops, a commander who worked as he commanded. They carved a network of channels, all designed to pull water away from the Euphrates' main flow. Every shovelful of dirt moved in silence, every sound a potential risk. At key points along the new channel, they built massive earthen dams, packed soil walls, holding the river's flow in place. The trap was ready. It just needed the right night. Cyrus had agents inside Babylon, patient intelligence sources who had been reporting for months. One piece of information changed the entire timeline. What Cyrus was about to attempt had never been executed at this scale before, and everything depended on a single night going exactly right. A major religious festival was approaching, a night when the entire city, from soldiers to generals, was expected to feast until dawn.
The Babylonians had a fatal weakness built into their own certainty. Centuries without a single defeat had calcified into something dangerous. The belief that walls were a force of nature, not a responsibility. Safety that total doesn't sharpen discipline, it erodes it, slowly, invisibly, until the one night it matters most. The festival arrived. Inside the great halls, Belshazzar drank from golden cups, and according to the book of Daniel, sacred vessels taken from Jerusalem's temple. The city was alive with absolute confidence. Ancient accounts suggest that inner river gates along the embankments may have been left unsecured that night, an oversight so small, with consequences so total. Miles upstream, in total darkness, Cyrus raised his hand. The signal passed silently down the line. Persian engineers drove their tools into the earthen dams. With a roar that rolled across the desert, the Euphrates shifted course. Massive volumes of water crashed into the diversion channel, draining away from the city that had depended on it for centuries. Back at the walls, Cyrus's assault units stood motionless in the riverbed shallows, watching the waterline in the dark, waiting, not breathing. Inch by inch, the river dropped, chest deep, waist deep, thigh deep. The ancient riverbed, submerged for centuries, rose slowly from the water. Cyrus looked at his commanders. The river is down. Move in. Absolute silence. If a single guard looks down, we die in this mud. Thousands of heavily armed Persian soldiers stepped into the cold shallows. No drums, no war cries, just boots moving through water in the dark. They advanced toward the iron grates where the river had passed beneath the walls, a claustrophobic choke point with sheer stone rising on both sides. One shout from above, and it was over. If a single Babylonian guard had looked down at the riverbed that moment, if a single torch had swept across the water, the entire operation would have ended in massacre. Every splash must have sounded enormous. Every loose stone shifting underfoot, a potential death sentence. The men who crossed that riverbed had nerves of iron. Babylon had spent generations preparing for an attack from outside. It had never once prepared for an enemy already inside. The Persians reached the grates, slipped beneath them, and emerged, impossibly, on the other side of Babylon's walls. Inside the most fortified city of their age, they were now in the inner channel. Steep stone embankments rose on both sides. Ahead, a second line of brass gates along the inner riverbank. Under any normal night, those gates would be sealed, guarded, an absolute final barrier. But this wasn't a normal night. Ancient accounts suggest they stood open. The Persians poured out of the riverbed like shadows, wet, covered in silt, weapons drawn, moving in total silence through streets that had never seen an enemy soldier. They didn't burn the buildings. They didn't shout. One target, the palace. Neutralize command. End it tonight. Babylon was so vast that while Persians were securing the river approaches, the center of the city was still alive with celebration. The empire was dying. The music played on. Gate by gate, post by post, the outer districts fell without a sound. Persian units moved like water through the streets, each position sealed before any alarm could spread. At the royal palace, the alarm finally reached Belshazzar. Guards burst in mid-banquet. The king looked up from his golden cup. His face said everything. Persian blades were already inside the walls. The Euphrates, Babylon's eternal shield, had been turned into a highway. There was nothing left to defend. Belshazzar fought. Ancient sources confirm resistance at the palace, but the psychological shock had already done the real damage. His fortress hadn't been broken. It had been bypassed entirely. Without central command, the Babylonian garrison collapsed. Thousands of soldiers, still armed, still trained, surrendered. They had no framework for what had just happened to them. Taking Babylon in a single night was extraordinary. But what Cyrus did next was just as remarkable, and far harder to believe. At dawn, Cyrus the Great rode through the main bronze gates of Babylon, not over mountains of dead, not through fire and ash. He entered a city still standing, still populated, still breathing. He had taken the most powerful fortress in the ancient world with shovels, patience, and a river. His orders were immediate: no looting of temples, no harm to civilians, respect the gods of Babylon. This was a conquest of legitimacy, not just territory. He freed the captive peoples held inside Babylon, including the Jewish exiles, a decision recorded in the Cyrus cylinder, now housed in the British Museum. Scholars describe it as an early expression of religious tolerance in recorded history. The engineers who carved that diversion channel in darkness never received monuments. History barely records their names. Yet their work changed the fate of empires. Consider what Cyrus actually asked of those men. Dig instead of fight. Work in darkness. Trust a plan that sounded like madness. And do it for months without knowing if it would work. That is what real operational leadership looks like. Not inspiring speeches before the battle, but making men execute the unglamorous work that makes victory possible. Babylon had every material advantage. Higher walls, more food, a river through the city. In the end, none of it mattered. Because Cyrus didn't fight the walls, he fought the certainty behind them. He found the one assumption Babylon had never questioned, and broke it. The defenders were watching the horizon for battering rams and siege towers. The threat came from underground, from the riverbed, from the dark. That is the permanent military lesson of this campaign. Defenders tend to prepare for the last war, the threat they can see, not the one being assembled quietly, upstream, in the dark. In warfare, surprise is not just a tactical advantage. It is a force multiplier that can collapse a superior enemy's will to resist. In a single night, the Babylonian Empire, dominant in the ancient world for centuries, ceased to exist as a sovereign power, absorbed into Persia before the sun came up. No prolonged urban combat, no burning districts, no mass executions, just cold, precise execution of a plan that had been months in the making. Cyrus entered Babylon not as a destroyer, but as a conqueror promising stability. He respected local religion, restored order, and sought legitimacy. Ancient records suggest many Babylonians accepted his rule. The strategic lesson here is permanent. Your enemy's greatest strength is always worth examining for the hidden assumption beneath it. The river that made Babylon invincible also made it blind. And the human lesson is even simpler. The walls survived that night. The empire didn't. Because stone holds, but arrogance always, eventually, opens the gate.